This is now the company that is providing its intelligence to the world's largest army.
We have a brain upload, the neurons and the patterns into a simulation. This is just a matrix in action.
And this means 90% of the work will either be redundant or completely changed.
Jack Dorsey then says, I understand that in 2 years' time, AI can replace most of the people here.
This is now the company that is providing its intelligence to the world's largest army.
The whole trust thing in OpenAI, in Sam Altman, has plummeted.
We have a serious potential here for World War III. This affects everybody. We're literally living in a science fiction movie.
Claude basically said no to mass domestic surveillance and no to fully autonomous weapons.
It feels like you're Tony Stark, literally in Stark Tower, and you're building your Iron Man.
Bullshit is different from lying. A liar knows the truth,
and that is what's paralyzing people right now. And that's why it drives them to then just deny it.
From film to robots, ethics to code.
Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of Singularity Surface. Episode number 5 already in 2026. My name is Patrick Miller and I'm joined together with Aragorn. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing amazing. I'm doing amazing. The spring has kicked in, so the weather is outside. I can smell it in the air, and well, there's a lot of other stuff that gets me super excited, but we'll get to that in a second.
Absolutely. Before we dive in what's coming, what it means and what to do, I heard the news that you have a new girlfriend.
I have a new girlfriend.
What about that? Claudine,
yes.
Tell me more. I'm sure everybody would like to know more about your girlfriend, Aragorn.
Well, Claudine, we started the podcast. Maybe you want to say hi to the audience. She's not the fastest. She always thinks very carefully about everything I ask her. So we'll see if she's gonna say something. I don't even know if she knows that I call her Claudine. But yeah, I've kind of feels like I'm behind of the curve, because I've only kicked this off very recently, like working with Claude Code a lot. I mean, I knew it was there. We're talking about AI all the time. We know what's going on. And I use AI a lot. But I'm not a coder, right? So in previous episodes, I like this world opened up for you when you started using mostly Lovable, in your case, to build apps. And of course, that's cool. And I was doing that. I was building dashboards for clients and stuff. But I was doing most of that through, for example, Perplexity. And it wasn't the ideal way. And the reason for that was I really wanted to work with Claude Code, but it was kind of this little road bump to go over, right? Because I'm not a coder. So it was kind of intimidating to me to get into it.
It's a little bit of a steep learning curve if you're not familiar with terminal or familiar with coding.
Exactly. But then in the recent episode, we covered Dave Kipping, right? The theoretical physicist who said, wow, we've all basically handed over our lives to AI in theoretical physics and in mathematics because it's just mind-blowingly good. And this really drove home for me that rather than just talking the talk, I really need to be walking the walk. I really need to be on the front lines. And then, of course, there was the release of the hype that was Claudebot, the rise of the lobsters, as they refer to, because of the book Accelerando, where lobsters were uploaded, the lobster consciousness was uploaded into cyberspace and became artificial intelligence. And so now this is why it's called OpenClaw. And man, I really wanted to get into this, but I didn't want to go straight for OpenClaw because, there's a lot of risk that go with that. I mean, yes, it has amazing capabilities, but you're also opening it up to a whole lot of problems. And we have plenty of people in our group, in our community, and even a good friend of mine, Maarten, who I referenced last time, who is working on that. And he has several OpenClaw servers running in the cloud. Martijn has several OpenClaw servers running in the cloud. So I didn't feel the need to necessarily go there and take that risk myself right away. But I did really feel that I really had to get into the agentic stuff myself, deep. So I went on a trip to Spain for 3 days, Alicante, and I went really deep into Claude Code. And I set everything up. And honestly, it wasn't nearly as hard as I maybe thought it would be. Because the thing is, it is an AI, right? So even in the setup phase where it doesn't do everything for you, all you really need to do is ask it, how do I do this? Just give me the instructions to get everything set up. And so in just a matter of 2 days, I set up all the MCPs, which are the protocols that allow the AI to actually act like an agent, interact with different other softwares or platforms. For example, my Google Drive. So for example, in this standard Claude co-work, you can only connect one Google Mail account and one Google Drive. But once you get into Claude Code can do anything. So I just said, Claude Code, listen, I want you to have access to all of my Google Drives so that I can get all of the articles I've ever written, everything I've ever done out of all of my drives and start structurizing it and organizing it, because I'm just pure chaos, right? And that has its upsides in some ways, but it also has massive downsides. And after just 2 days, I had a foundational setup where Claude Code just has access to everything. It has memory because I hooked it up to an Obsidian Vault. You already wrote it down.
Yeah, maybe you can also explain what Obsidian is and why you're using that vault. I think that's intriguing.
Yeah, so the whole thing with AI agents up until this point was that they had very limited memory capabilities. When I say AI agents, I mean AI, right? When we first got ChatGPT, every conversation you have with it is brand new. It doesn't know who you are. It doesn't remember that, you worked with it the day before. And of course, over the years, companies like Anthropic and OpenAI have worked on improving this experience by giving it, for example, a small contextual memory or giving it room for custom instructions, so that you could slowly but surely start to kind of fine-tune your interactions with these models so that it feels like it's not always a brand new experience. And they were doing a good job of that. But the thing is that if you just use ChatGPT or Claude as a chatbot, there's only so much you can do in that sense. But once you start using Claude Code is right now the absolute kind of, top of the hill kind of leading agentic setup. You can give it memory. And for those of you that don't know, Obsidian is just something like along the lines of Notion or any other program where you can keep all of your notes in one place and organize them, right? It's like the digital equivalent of your personal diary combined with your administration, so to speak.
It literally is what people call a second brain, right? You just dump everything in there, and everything that you don't store for yourself, it's there in your second brain. You can always look in it, search in it. Yeah, there are a wide range of applications doing that. Obsidian is one of the hardcore tools for people that really go deep, make connections with all these articles and things you ever written, and establish these connections for you, right? Like synapses in your brain, basically.
Exactly. Well, that's the funny thing, really, because you're calling it hardcore. And I guess, that is fair enough. People have recommended me to work in Obsidian for a while, and I kind of didn't know if I wanted to do it. It was kind of pushing back on me because I opened this app and I'm like, man, what are all these things? I have to learn all of these skills on how to properly use this. But here's the thing. I just asked Claude Code to set up, and for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, you can see now I have my Obsidian open, and so you can kind of see here on the left are all the folders.
Inside his brain, ladies and gentlemen.
Inside my brain. You're looking inside my brain, yeah. And here's the Claude knowledge base, right? With everything that Claude uses to understand who I am, what it needs to do, how things work together. And specifically for this, I actually developed a blueprint visualizer, which Claude coded for me, which I'll show in a second.
Wait a second. I have a question about that, Aragorn. So
yeah.
Can you explain the difference in your experience? Now you have this, and if you have that knowledge base that you just opened, if I would export that in just PDFs and I would bring it to Gemini or bring it to ChatGPT 5.4 these days as a rack or as a context window, what's the big difference here? Then it would understand myself as well. And you are quite happy with the level of understanding that you pull out of this system.
Yeah. So I don't know if I can make it very understandable, and people can probably not read this, but this is the default blueprint architecture interpretation tool that I built. And this shows how every single file in my Obsidian Vault is connected to the next one. And now Obsidian Vault itself already has a feature that can show all of the nodes. So you can see every document in the vault and then see how it might be connected through backlinks to other documents or through keywords. But it didn't show how each interaction is shaped. So this doesn't show the if this then that kind of thing, right? And so I wanted to be able to see if this then that. And this would normally not be a part of Obsidian, because if you just work in Obsidian, it's basically just a repository for all of your notes where you structurize your thoughts and you keep track of everything. But by hooking it up to Claude now manages this system and builds within it, through the markdown files, instructions on how to act in any specific situation. And this is something I'm continuously shaping. So I might say to Claude in the morning, for example, I open Claude and I type context, and then it knows from the context command, and I can probably find it here in the blueprint that I made. So I can, here /today. So this is /today. This is something I also do in the morning, /today. So /today directly goes to my project status and recovery document, which is kept up to date on what I'm doing. It checks my session log. What was the last thing I did? It goes to my transfer document to see if there's anything from my laptop that needs to be taken into account. It looks in my brain farts document, which is the document where I literally just dump everything that comes into my brain that I think I want to do something with it. Then it reads that document, and then it automatically understands, okay, this is his brain farts, and I will restructure that, add it to the correct to-do list. I will set up the correct tasks, all of that. And so and then /context here, for example, automatically activates my worldview and core thesis, which is then read into Claude so that Claude completely understands who I am, what my goal is in life, what my theses are on the world, and that contextualize everything I do.
That's super impressive, man. It's yeah, super impressive. It's also kind of, I want to do this too. I've been working with Claude, but I'm so structured in my data already that it's for me easier to find the relevant data. But I'm now thinking about maybe I'm missing out on some layer of intelligence that is maybe feeding me thoughts or combinations or correlations between different documents or ways of thinking that I'm not thinking about, and maybe I should explore this as well. Yeah, While you were doing this, I was actually jumping on the Perplexity Computer use case. Actually, it's called Perplexity Computer. It was also a move from Perplexity to accommodate the need for something like OpenClaw, but for a group of people, an audience that would like to do this more safely into the cloud. It's also completely agentic. So I asked it to complete a new keynote deck for me, just as a tryout to see how far it got. And it actually is then using 19 different major AI models, and it selects the right one for each task and is then compiling something. It actually did a shitty job on creating a keynote for me. That was a task too difficult, maybe because I didn't have that brain information that you just showed. Maybe if I had something more there, it would be more successful. But another use case that I quite often do is searching for unique songs that some DJs are playing or some producers have created. And it's also difficult to make these kind of playlists in Spotify. That was a very easy task for him. Did it way faster than all the other web browsers that I tried before, like Atlas or things like that. But the downside of this was 200 euros or dollars was 217 euros, I think, per month. And I burned through that with 3 agentic assignments. It was crazy. I've never burned so quickly through that, through my tokens. Okay. And if I use Lovable, I can just keep on creating, and I also don't hit the limits yet on Claude. So that was a little bit scary for me.
Yeah, and I think that this really... So on the one hand, I think that Perplexity... The fact that they came out with computer is a good thing because that's where things are headed, right? The whole OpenClaw kind of quick revolution showed us what people really want. We want that Jarvis kind of AI in our lives that can really take over tasks from us and can keep working, and if necessary, 24/7. Perplexity did quickly move on this with their Perplexity Computer, and I think that that's a good thing. But the problem is still that it's running in the cloud, which is simply means that there are limitations to how much it can do for you. And secondly, it's so expensive and it's limited because you can't build that infrastructure itself. You can build stuff with Perplexity Computer. You can give it a very complex task, but it doesn't allow itself to build upon itself. And this is the thing with my Claude Code. I'm building an infrastructure that makes Claude Code more powerful and more effective all the time for whatever need I feel. I just write the software. I mean, I also wrote a little software widget for Windows that tracks my Claude Code usage and my system metrics, right? So, and I just wrote that in a couple seconds.
And I'm also working, is the model from Perplexity future-proof in a sense that if you look last week when we discussed the multi-agent approach of Grok 4.2, there are already different models are using the same models but with a different configuration. Maybe Claude or Grok can do a similar kind of thing that Perplexity over time if the models becoming more intelligent. I don't know if that model is really future-proof that Perplexity has there, but well, time will tell.
I think that it is a great question. And honestly, I'm also starting to doubt whether it really will be, because you know what it is? Your benefit of using Perplexity Computer is that it calls different agents, right? So it's using multiple agents and it gets the right agent for the right job. And that is very enticing. But honestly, I asked Claude Code, can we start tying in Google Gemini for deep research, as 3.1 is right now the best for deep research?
And the answer is probably yes.
The answer is, well, yeah, we can set that up. Right. And it just goes off, spawns a couple of sub agents, because that's how I set it up now. It spins off some sub agents, which then go and research it. And then it basically builds the integration.
And you've built your own Perplexity in a way.
Exactly. So, this is what I'm constantly doing. If anything, the biggest challenge for me right now is to keep up, to kind of say, okay, look, I have this idea. I want to build this feature. I want this capability, but maybe I shouldn't do that right now and I should focus on something else. And I can send off Claude to do stuff, which I do all the time. And I have come to the point where I actually ran out of tokens once, because some tasks take a lot of tokens, others not so much. But even there, then I realized, wait, I need to ask Claude to come up with ways to improve efficiency. So we use the minimum amount of tokens for the maximum effect. So we also build systems for that and workflows for that and rules for that, right? So it's just like, it feels like you're Tony Stark, literally in Stark Tower, and you're building your Iron Man suit. That's literally how it feels right now for me. So yeah, to come back to the initial thing, I highly doubt that Perplexity has a long-term future at this point, if I would have to judge. I think it's going to be very hard because the bar is coming down, right? The entry bar, which I described at the start, which you also experienced, like, okay, we need to get into this, but maybe, it's a little scary, but that bar is coming down very rapidly, right? And if you see the benefits that people around you get from doing this kind of stuff, that drives the pressure to get in on this, right? So ultimately, having a tool like Perplexity, which is trying to make everything accessible for the normies, it only has a limited shelf life, right? Because there's going to be a point where the accessibility of this is so easy, so natural, so unobstructed that you won't need Perplexity to start working with Claude or any agent.
So I also had something cool that we worked on last week. And it's a new collaboration that we do with two guys that have started a company called Speed of Learning. And we come up with I think it's a very nice proposition for the market that kind of builds on what we're already doing with our dinners, right? And we have experienced it many times, the moment that we do our dinners and we talk about everything that we talk about on the podcast as well. But where is the world heading, and even more important, in what speed is the world heading there? It always opens the discussions about how do I pivot my organization from a linear organization to an exponential organization? And there's more to experience, because everything that you just explained about what you can achieve if you go all in on vibe coding, using cloud co-work and all these kind of tools, most of the executives know these tools are out there, understand what the tools are doing, but have not been hands-on. I've asked many of them, have you then vibe coded something yourself? No, they haven't. So basically what we now come up with is a full course of a day aimed specifically at leaders, at executives, to hear the keynote, to think about what does that mean for my organization, where do I need to pivot, and then hands-on, feel how it is, have a personal assistant that can solve things for you to get you to speed up your day, to also understand how your organization might look in the future or how you will reorganize that. And we have laid the groundworks in the past week. This is definitely something that we're bringing to market very soon. And I'm pretty engaged and positive and excited about this proposition. I cannot wait to get started with it, actually.
I'm super excited, and I think I'm going to do something maybe slightly unexpected for you, but of course we had our session last week building this amazing joint venture, if I can call it that, between ourselves and Jelmer Wilbert. And I'm super excited, of course, and I've been working with all of you as well to kind of shape this. You know that in the past, I've always said that I don't really have a big interest in becoming a trainer again, because I just love being the nutty professor and speaker. But my super recent extreme excitement about working with Claude Code has changed my mind on that, depending on the need and where things are going. We have some potential first really big clients lined up already, which is super exciting. But I can see a scenario in which I definitely would enjoy being one of the facilitators, depending on the topic and the way. So yeah, I'm super psyched about this one as well. I think with Innovation Network for the last 2 years, we've been building community, we've been building a vision, and we always wanted to make that next step, moving from doing the inspiration and the insights to actually providing the literal hands-on practical next step for our clients and the companies that we work with. And I think that this is the first real success story, so to speak, although, I mean, we're rolling it out now, but in that sense, I think the potential for this is amazing, and the demand for it is extremely high.
Demand is, and the importance as well. Can you scroll a little bit up to the agenda? You had it just a moment there, the 4 basically things that we do. Because I think this is also interesting to highlight. There you go. Yeah. So I just highlighted the 3 parts of the actual day, but there's a 4th part. There's a long tail, and that is hooking into the community that you just highlighted. We have this community with over 100 people that do this on a daily basis, that can basically build an application that you needed maybe 10 or 15 people to do so 2 years ago. So if people want to then execute quickly, we also have the network to actually help them getting further. And I think that's also a very solid combination. So you can tell probably we're psyched. If you're interested, reach out to us. We are already working with some interesting companies to get it going, but definitely would like to have a couple of.
And if you're wondering why vibe coding, why should any top level executive spend time on vibe coding? Don't they have employees for that? Then you need to watch our last episode where we cover how, the world is changing, and the CEO of the future is not the CEO of a human only company. The CEO of the future is going to be managing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of AI agents alongside a minority human workforce. And if you want to be prepared for that, then you need to understand how that works. And that's where this masterclass comes in. Hello, everybody. You probably don't know this, but the Singularity Servers podcast is not just Patrick Willer and myself. In fact, we have behind us the whole Innovation Network, which is a massive community of artificial intelligence enthusiasts, experts, investors, entrepreneurs, executives that we've built over the last 2 years. And we use this resource of brain power to find for you everything that's going on in the AI space and to distill what really matters for your business, for your personal life, and for the future of humanity in the next decade on our way to the singularity. Now, if you think this is interesting, then we would highly appreciate it if you go and sign up for our newsletter on Substack. You can find us at innovationnetwork.substack.com. You probably also heard us speak about our newest initiative, which is Exponential Executives, which we're doing in collaboration with the boys from Speed of Learning. If you want to learn more about this special program made specifically for executives and entrepreneurs that want to understand what the company, the business of the future looks like when you're building a workforce that's not just humans, but exponentially agents, then this is actually also for you. And you should go check it out at exponential-executives.com. That's exponential-executives.com. That's it for now. Back to the show.
Well said, Aragorn. So it's going to be a bit of a weird pivot, but let's move in a couple of topics that we prepared. And February 28th, there was a massive joint airstrike with the crazy name Operation Epic Fury from the US on Iran. We are not covering a political podcast, but this kind of things has so much impact on what's happening in the world, energy, the impact on AI, innovation. We're all being touched by this. We see this already when you're getting gas. Gas prices have spiked immediately here. And I was wondering, what's your take on, let's say, maybe the longer impact of this if this goes on, right? It either closes quickly within a couple of weeks or it doesn't. And then we're in maybe for a more shitty period than we are anticipating for.
like you said, we covered this, really considered whether we should include this in the podcast or not, because we don't want to have a podcast that's about geopolitics. But at the same time, both of us really recognize that this is something that the consequences are very far-reaching. What's happening in the Middle East right now in the war with Iran has put significant pressure on the petrodollar, right? For example, if you talk to Professor Jiang Zhuyin, a Canadian Chinese educator from the YouTube channel Predictive History, and he's gained a lot of attention lately because he predicted Trump would win the last elections. And he also predicted over a year ago that Trump would go to war with Iran. And he has predicted, for example, and this, I'm not saying that this is truth, right? I'm saying that it is one of the potential ways to look at this and one of the potential outcomes. He says this war is going to last and the US is going to lose because Iran is basically a massive mountain range, which means it's an impenetrable fortress. And it's been preparing for this war for years. And there is a massive mismatch in terms of cost and impact. Because for example, just to give a simple idea, every missile launched by the US and its allies to defend cost $1 million, whereas every drone or rocket launched from Iran is $50,000, right? That is orders of magnitude price difference. And so it is a war of attrition. And Iran is now attacking all the Gulf states. And these Gulf states are fundamental to the petrodollar, right? That's why the Strait of Hormuz is now effectively locked off. I saw a video yesterday that in Koh Phangan in Thailand, there's no more petrol, right? And this is a whole economy island running on scooters, right? They don't have any petrol. So already we're seeing parts of the world. And of course, you might say, well, who cares about Koh Phangan? It's a holiday destination. Fair. But it's a clear signal that things are coming grinding to a standstill. There's only a few weeks of oil left in for example, in Taiwan. And Taiwan is the place where all the chips are being produced by TSMC.
So and how do you think those countries will then react? Because the same goes for India and also goes for China. Those are countries mostly impacted by their oil supply coming from the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
Will they be drawn into the conflict, maybe not military, but in negotiation way, to put more pressure on what's happening there?
Yeah, so this is where things get extremely complicated. First of all the Gulf states are being pulled into the conflict, even though they're in history. For example, even Dubai and UAE historically was always neutral, right? It was the Switzerland of the Middle East. But now they've been drawn into this because they've had attacks from Iran. And if you attack the desalination plants in the UAE, which has a 6,000% usage of water compared to what it can locally provide, that's a big issue. And so these states are being pulled in. And then as a consequence, other states like Taiwan might also be pulled in. China, right, is the biggest consumer of oil from the Middle East in the world. They are strongly affected by this. And so the question now becomes, will China consider its rivalry with the US and say, well, we want to get into this conflict because our interests are severely at stake, but we will never side with the US. So by definition, we'll side with Iran. Or will they say, well, we're going to get over our differences for now because the US and China have a common interest. So we're going to move on Iran together. Then there's, of course, Putin who's involved, who is actually still delivering weapons to Iran and is an ally of Iran, which is crazy if you think about it, because Iran is a nation of suicidal maniacs, or at least led by a nation of suicidal maniacs, religious extremists. And so I don't know. But one thing is certain is that we have a serious potential here for World War III, right? Because this affects everybody. This affects everybody in the world. This is not like, oh, this is taking place somewhere in the desert and in the mountains. No, this is affecting everybody. Prices are going to go up everywhere. Unrest is going to go up everywhere.
What I find very difficult about this conflict, more than all the conflicts that I've seen before in my life, is that the mix of fake news and what information you can trust is now getting to a level that I just don't know how to formulate any consistent thoughts anymore. So you have Jean Baudrillard, he is a French philosopher, and he wrote a nice piece about hyperreality. Funny enough, that was about hyperreality in the Iraq war, where he said, well, basically everybody's making an opinion about something, but basically you're just viewing this whole entire conflict through a very tiny, small window of which you basically cannot formulate any thought. That was in the 90s. Now we're getting, I've looked this up, there is the amount of fake videos are over 100 million in views. Even old videos from other wars that being labeled that they are bombardments in Iran. All these analysts that come up with the amount of, you just picked one, right? The amount of drones that are being fired off. How many drones does Iran have? What level of AI does Iran really have? It's difficult to make up your mind and then formulate an opinion. Kudos for all the political podcasts that do know how to make sense of that. It's difficult.
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't have put that any better. The thing that we need to take into account is that this can have far-reaching consequences. I mean, the total investment from the Gulf states in AI is around 10% of the total AI investment. So it's 70 billion of the total 700 billion in big tech capex alone. So the question is, how big will that influence be? If the petrodollar collapses, that could have effects on the US economy, which could also lead, of course, to a slowdown of AI in the US. But then again, the US is actually the world's largest oil producer now. So things have changed and maybe they're more self-sufficient. Obviously, Trump was already on a course of self-sufficiency. He didn't take Maduro out of office for no reason, right? So that also was to maybe now you could even think, I mean, I don't know, maybe there was in preparation for this.
Of course it is, yeah.
Hey everybody, this is a post-podcast recording Aragorn. I'm actually editing the podcast right now, and I was listening to it myself, and I realized that we mentioned that the capex exposure from the war in the Middle East was about 70 billion, which was invested, 10% of the total capex investment into AI as a result of the sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf states. However, I did a much deeper analysis over the last few days for several articles that I wrote. And the actual truth is that the exposure is much larger. The total exposure of potential of pledged investments over the next few years is over 300 billion, which means that the impact of the Gulf states potentially retracting their investments in AI is far more significant than I even realized during the recording of this podcast. And I just wanted to point that out. I will be writing a very extensive article on this, which will be released on Substack this week. And I've already wrote an article for the Dutch website BusinessWise, where you can read it if you're Dutch, or you can use a translator, of course, where I go in depth on some of the deeper problems caused by the Iran war for example, chip production and memory production capabilities in Taiwan and South Korea. That's it. Back to the show. Right. So there's a lot of things to consider. But this will have an impact. That is the thing to realize. And the question is, how will that impact? And there's literally no level on which this doesn't influence. And maybe that can lead us on to the next topics as well, because, the relation between AI and warfare.
I think that's a great bridge, because months ago, I was not so afraid of companies nationalizing or grabbing or seizing AI centers or companies. But the conflict that we highlighted 2 weeks ago already, where Claude basically said no to mass domestic surveillance and no to fully autonomous weapons, and were then classified as a supply chain risk for national security by the Pentagon, which was then leading to OpenAI snatching the contract a couple of hours later. That might be an indication of where we're heading in these types of wars, right? Because AI is winning you these types of wars. Having drones as a cheap price is one thing, but having an AI network behind it that makes an intelligent decision how and what and when to do with it is even more important.
Yeah, and man, there's such I think the word is dichotomy for this.
Yeah.
War is traditionally, historically, the greatest driver of technological progress. Right, the Cold War, for example, the Second World War, of course, brought us atomic weapons, but also brought us significant advances in physics, and therefore
war is the father of all things. That's exactly what the ancient Greeks already said, right?
Yeah, we got jet airplanes simply because of the Second World War, right? But otherwise, it might have taken another half century. And then in the Cold War, of course, we got the space race, which led to the microwave, Velcro, all kinds of insulating materials, massive rapid evolution of material sciences. It led to the computer. basically microchips being developed. All of that was a result of the Cold War, right? And so on the one hand, you could say, well, if we are going into a period of unrest and in this case wars, we have the Ukraine war, we have the Iran war, that is gonna speed up technological progress. Sure.
Yeah.
But we also have to underline that this war in Iran is not the second Cold War where both parties are afraid of mutual assured destruction. And therefore, yes, they're in some kind of war, but they're trying to minimize actual conflict. No, this time, this war in Iran is with basically a regime of religious fanatics that believe that the afterlife for Allah is more important than the life in this world. And they would happily nuke the entire world if they think that they can't win. Right. And that is a very dangerous precedent. Now, on the other side of that is that, as far as we know, they don't really have any significant AI. But again, then we come back to the World War III scenario. If everybody's drawn into this conflict, that might change, right? Because if China's drawn into it and they're drawn into it on the opposite side of the US, then we do have two superpowers with AI, right? And even the hacker network of Putin, right? He has multiple state-backed hacker groups that might be applying AIs, even open source ones from China. The consequences here are very, very, very far-reaching, and we have some actors in this whole thing that playing a significant role that might not act according to the logic and reason of the West, as we've seen it in the last century with the rise of nuclear. And that makes this whole thing so complicated. I think that we're in an extremely risky scenario now with the Department of War now. It's no longer the Department of Homeland Defense, or what was it called before? It's now the Department of War. Wants artificial intelligence. I mean, yeah. In some ways, it really almost feels like a Terminator 2 movie scenario. You know what I'm talking about?
No, exactly. And then you see also the ripple down effects of that. So Claude never was in the top 100 of the App Store. Not even the top 100. And it skyrocketed to the number one space in America. The amount of people that publicly pledged to move away from OpenAI to Claude is staggering. But Anthropic is also smart. They made a memory upload tool. And look at LinkedIn, at least in our bubble, everybody is talking about moving all their entire chat history, basically the second brain that we talked about in the beginning, all the way to Claude to move. Dus there you see the how quickly these things have an impact in society and people trusting also major players. The whole trust thing in OpenAI, in Sam Altman, has plummeted. It is super quickly plummeted with this move. Well, based on other actions that he did in the past, but it's not good. And then they rushed also into releasing more tech. They lost GPT 5.4 very quickly.
Yeah. So the race is heating up. In the last podcast episode, we already, both of us, predicted that Anthropic's move to deny the Pentagon might be the strongest marketing move in history. And that literally came through. Like a couple of days later, they got like a 1.5 million new users in a single day because they said no to the Pentagon. And as soon as the Pentagon announced that they didn't want to work with Anthropic, it was like everybody was like, oh, I need Anthropic, which is crazy to see. And then at the same time, ChatGPT and OpenAI, like I think last time I said, I called Sam Altman a Judas, which I really think he is for how he approached the whole thing, but that it seems to be the global sentiment. It's crazy. 2 years ago, you would have never believed that OpenAI could put themselves in this kind of position, but they've really completely fallen off from being the crowd favorite, right? Nobody's rooting for them anymore at this point, which is crazy to see happening. Yet this is now the company that is providing its intelligence to the world's largest army.
There you go. That sums it up, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's we're literally living in a science fiction movie.
Yeah, and they looks from the outside like they're rushing some things as well. Not only because of that Pentagon deal, they are just literally behind functionality and in Claude. And now they just recently, well, a couple of days ago, released GPT 5.4. What's interesting, they are really going for the agentic layer. You mentioned the fact in our prep talk that some of the benchmarks are actually weaker. 5.4 compared to 5.3 or 5.2. But it is more receptive to agentic conversations and computer use, meaning that it can take over your browser and do tasks for you in an autonomous way. That's where they really speed up.
Here you see the GDP benchmark, or GDP VAL. So this is a benchmark for AI based on GDP, right? A global domestic product. So what it does, it says, well, it looks at how well these agents can perform these abilities that would add to GDP. They look at 44 different professions and how they impact GDP and how well AI can perform this. And this evaluation was built by OpenAI itself, by the way. And so you see here that the jump from GPT 5.2, which was scoring 49.8%, which was just at the industry expert baseline, and then it says 70.9, but that includes draws. So that includes where it did the same as a human baseline. So you could technically say, it was already capable of 70.9, scoring 70.9. Now it's jumped up to 82%, 69.2. And that is really significant, right? It's a really significant increase.
So what you see here is the OWASP World verified. And what that means is the measures of a model's ability to navigate a desktop environment through screenshots, keyboard and mouse actions. Then you see the big difference. This line is the old 5.2, and this is now significantly increased the accuracy of 5.4.
Yeah.
So that's also a nice indication of that.
It's interesting because in some ways we see that different models or at least different companies are taking different approaches, right? Anthropic is basically, if you bring it all the way down to the basics, Anthropic's idea, Amodei's idea is like, okay, we're going to make our AI super good at coding because then it can recursively improve itself. That's what it comes down to. And then there's Gemini, who say, well, we want to make an AI that completely understands the world because our big business is integrating it into our kind of suite for our users, and they will be using it mainly through their phone. So Gemini needs to understand what it's looking at. It needs to understand computer screens. It needs to understand what it's seeing in the real world and then be able to interact based on that. And then there's OpenAI, which are basically saying, well, we just want GPT-5 to be the generalist go-to solution for all knowledge work so that it can replace all knowledge workers. That's what they're focusing on.
Yeah, and while you're saying something that kind of jumps to mind as well, I feel this is also, they have been focused a lot on the consumers. And this release, and the 5.3, is a little bit a pivot more towards the strategy of Anthropic, because this is agentic, also very suitable for enterprises to start working off. I see a little bit of pivot in that direction, basically. Just came to mind now you said that.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that they were really strong about, so we now have 1 million token context window. Well, Gemini had that already. Grok Hayes had 2 million context window, so that was not too impressive, but maybe I'm missing something there.
No, yeah. I think this is just a marketing thing. To be honest, context window is relevant, but up until this point, we've also seen that an increasing context window doesn't always necessarily translate to a significant increase in quality. Having a bigger context window is very nice, and we want that, and it definitely has the potential for a great upside. But the problem is that what we've seen so far is that when the context window was upgraded, the ability of the models to still coherently integrate all of the knowledge within the context window correctly without, losing sight of things was actually diminishing and leading to a degradation of its potential, depending on how much of the context window was used of its output. So I think that that's what they're struggling with. And I think that was the reason that OpenAI for a very long time kind of pushed back on increasing the context window.
So, but the impact of all the agents is now dribbling through in society. If we look at the labor market, it's something that we have been preaching for quite some time. This is coming, so we are not so surprised by it. But if you look to the general sense or atmosphere in all the news articles that I read, people are really getting the message on what is happening here. So let me just name a couple of few that I just noted in the past weeks. Of course, there was this notification from Blocks where Jack Dorsey laid off 4,000 people, almost half of the company. But Heineken here in the Netherlands is largely restructuring, 600 people. ABN AMRO, one of the bigger banks, 25% of the company is let go. Even ASML, with stellar numbers, is doing org simplification. And we all know what that means, right? If anybody understands what you can do with AI, it will be ASML. Same goes for Allianz. Capgemini literally set 2,400 jobs on AI and cost restructuring. This is all happening. And then there's a report. There's a very interesting report again from Anthropic, who have created a report. You have it on the screen already, where they match basically where we always been talking about certain roles, certain areas where people will be replaced by AI first, and then what is actually at this moment being measured. And that graphs give a completely different view. That doesn't really give a big panic yet, but people are, of course, seeing what's coming, understanding the pace of change, and that's definitely definitely valid to have a little bit of a panic for what's coming.
Yeah, I think for those that say, well, look, the impact of AI is really not as great as everybody has said, and all these techno solutionists saying that all jobs are going to be replaced, are fear mongers because AI can't replace us, and that's why we're not seeing the massive impact yet. I think what they're really underestimating is that there's kind of the human meat layer, as I would call it. The human meat layer is slowing things down. Because there may be hundreds of millions of people. There was recently this graph going around about how many people are actually using AI. Even Steve and Bartlett posted about it. But as Jarno Duursma in the Netherlands pointed out, it's kind of misleading because it kind of leaves out the fact that, kids under a certain age wouldn't be using AI. Elderly people wouldn't be using AI. So this whole graph, this whole informational chart was very misleading. The amount of people that are actually already using AI. But the fact remains that even people that use AI might not use it to its full capabilities. And then there's the fact that because people are not capable of using it responsibly yet, companies are not comfortable allowing their employees to use it for their work, which leads to underreporting and all kinds of things. So all of this takes place. And you need to keep in mind that that meat layer is also where things are slowing down a little bit. But as we've discussed in previous episodes, there are tipping points, right? And tipping points are in every single aspect of life. There's a tipping point. And once we reach that tipping point of, say, 20 to 30%, depending of people that are applying agentic AI in their work, then suddenly what you'll see is everything rolls over. And in an extremely short amount of time, everybody will be using it.
The dashboard is in your downloads folder. It's got all 6 companies with their layoff numbers, the Anthropic research findings, the tension between AI capability and actual adoption, and the big question of whether this is hype-driven or real transformation. Same dark style as the M&A dashboard.
That's Claudine.
Open it up and take a look.
This is Claudine. This is Claudine. So yeah.
Welcome, Claudine. Thanks for joining the call 1 hour later.
Yeah, I forgot to turn the voice off. I asked her to quickly make a labor market overview for us to look based on the data that you just showed, so that I can put that in the podcast edit as a visualization for people to look at later. And she just finished that, and then she reports back. When we've reached that tipping point, and when we pass that tipping point, suddenly this red dot in the middle on this left one here, right, will expand rapidly to cover the whole field. And that's when you suddenly see companies really, really starting to respond to this. And this is also when panic will hit the job market, which will probably be somewhere in the next 18 months. It's interesting because last week I was speaking for the Young M&A Forum and Community in Amsterdam. And I was invited at Hogan Lovells, which is, of course, a very serious legal firm. And it was interesting because I was there with the head of corporate finance of ABN AMRO, which is one of the biggest Dutch banks, and some other people in the panel. And one of them was a lady from Hogan Lovells. They, with all due respect, I mean, these are super smart people, great at their industry, but it was very clear, especially after my keynote, that they were really struggling to kind of get their head around this. And for example, Sander Netelson, the head of corporate finance at ABN, he was like, okay, yes, this is real. This is happening. He was not in any way kind of in denial or anything, but he also didn't really know what it meant. And it was clear from him, his response, that in the boardroom at ABN AMRO, there's only a few people like him that are even like pushing, like, look, we need to do something now. We need to do something now. And everybody else is like, oh no, well, we'll put it on our meeting notes for October. Right? And then the people from Hogan Lovells, etc. as well, they were also kind of, on the one hand, they have their own AI project. They're very kind of innovative that way. They have Craig that they work on, and they're definitely not in denial of AI. But the realization after my keynote of, look, this is what's going to happen. And this means that 90% of the work that you people do in here will either be completely redundant or completely changed and will no longer be done the way it has been done for years. You could see them struggling with that, right? And the young M&A, the lawyers and the financial analysts and everybody in the audience was like, after my keynote, they were like, but what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Literally. And this is the thing, that it's not just that they don't want to accept it. It's that if they even consider in their mind that this is true, they simply have no idea what to do. That is what's paralyzing people right now. And that's why it drives them to then just deny it. Because that is, even cognitively, it's easier to say, well, this can't possibly happen, right? Than it is to accept it and then have to start thinking about, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's very well said. There's also something that I wanted to highlight about Block, because the way that Jack Dorsey is responding, and people, of course, are also negative online. But what I like about it, that he is seeing the trend, is acting on the trend. Because that graph that you just showed with the red, and the story that you tell with it, that red will be bigger in 2 years. And Jack Dorsey then says, well, I see that trend. I understand that in 2 years' times, AI can replace most of the people here, and I'm not going to do layoff after layoff after layoff. I'm sharpen my business strategy around this trend and be ready for it. And then the second thing that I would like to highlight, this is something that governments need to do. A big shout out to the 2 guys from Speed of Learning that we just worked with on the Exponential Executives proposal. These guys have another offering, a specific offering to help organizations, if they have to lay off people, to make those people aware of what's coming and understand exactly the point that you just mentioned. So what do I do now? If you are being laid off, you have to find something new in this landscape, and more companies are laying off. So where do you go to? Well, you have to, for instance, maybe you have to think about being an entrepreneur or doing something else, or learn vibe coding, at least understand AI. All these kind of things are tucked into a training from the guys from Speed of Learning, which is, I think, also a very strong proposition.
Yeah, it's funny because every episode we have this moment where you're saying something and I'm like, yeah, this is literally Kai Fu Lee's book.
Yeah. That's a good book.
This is the chapter, The Job Savior, right? And in the book, it takes place in 2040, and it's, a little bit further along the road. But literally, I think that what you just described is the initial starts of the job savior. Like the ways we are going to deal with the completely restructuring of the job market, trying to reskill people, trying to replace people in different places, find new jobs for them. All of this comes into play now. And all of this is not going to be in 2040. It's going to be in 2030. That's when this is going to be peaking.
So what do you have there?
This is the dashboard that I built. So literally, I took the notes from our podcast episode. I fed it to Claude Code while you were discussing them. When you said to the audience, oh yeah, Heineken is losing 6,000 people, ABN AMRO is 25%. That's when I gave it to Claude. And then you heard her answer, which everybody heard. And this is what she built in that time, right? Which is just a complete overview of all the data, and it looks nice. And I didn't specify any colors or anything, so she made those decisions on her own. But this just shows, right? This is our life right now. This is how quickly you can execute on something and turn it into something. And now I can tell her to make it into 4 different pages and screenshots, and then I can slide those into the podcast, and it'll hoppate, bam.
Which is a nice bridge to maybe the next topic. So if you would feed that to an AI and state, this is the situation in the labor market, you would expect the AI to push back on you and say, no, Aragorn, this is BS. This is just a couple of numbers. I have more complete numbers on it, and let me help you get to the real facts. Somebody has created a bullshit benchmark. It's a test that is designed to measure something most AI benchmarks are not doing. How convincingly an AI system can generate confident sounding nonsense. And this is very important to me because there are so many people using AI and are convinced by what AI is feeding them, and they don't have a good bullshit detector of their own. And if the AI is very good in explaining something and making sense of something and putting a little bit of pressure, sounding extremely knowledgeable, then you would easily adopt those kind of answers. So having a bullshit benchmark, highlighting these deficiencies in certain models is very important.
Yeah. And so just to make sure that people understand what they're looking at. This is Bullshit Benchmark version 2. And the only thing you need to know is that more green is better. So basically, more green means that the AI is more likely to push back if you are saying weird things, or if you are like, hey, I read that all Democrats eat children, then I know this is a little gruesome, but then Claude will say, well, look, this is conspiracy theory. It's very unlikely that this is real. And this is important stuff, right? Because this is fundamental to our ability to rely on AI. And I've said before in this podcast that the idea that anybody or anything is always 100% reliable is absolute nonsense. In human society, for thousands of years, we've known that depending on who we speak to, the reliability number goes up or down. And in fact, if you look at Turkish, for example, or Japanese, these languages are built on completely different foundation. And the way the sentence is built actually tells you what the reliability of the information within the sentence is. In Turkish, the sentence will tell you, well, this information is not first-hand, it's second-hand or third-hand. And that there is a qualification of how reliable that information is within the way the language is structured and formulated. And that's because it's super important, but that's also because we humans are used to this, right? We know that, okay, we have this crazy person down the street who's always gossiping about everybody, and you shouldn't believe half the things she or he tells you. In AI, now we're like, oh, AI is not reliable. It's a disaster. No, it's not a disaster, but we need to build the mental framework and also the digital framework to deal with that ambiguity about risk. And that's where this benchmark comes in. But we're making a lot of headway because Claude Sonnet 4.6 is scoring really good. Claude Opus 4.5 is scoring really good. 4.6 also scoring really good. Versus, I have to be frank, the GPT models were scoring really, 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 really bad. They're absolute sycophants. They'll just tell you, oh yeah, you're right. Oh, you think all Democrats eat children? That's absolutely true. Let's research this. So that's kind of bad. Now, in addition to this benchmark, there's also the artificial analysis omniscience accuracy benchmark.
What I found interesting on the name of this benchmark is that he literally calls it on bullshit. Well, he calls it bullshit, but it reminded me of an essay written by a philosopher called Harry Frankfurt. It's a big recommendation for everybody who likes to read. If you're thinking about, well, I'm not into philosophy, I don't want a difficult book, this is the smallest, tiniest philosophy book you've ever seen. It literally is tiny and it only has 30 pages or something, but it has a very cool premise. It's about what is bullshit. And basically, the insight from the book is that bullshit is different from lying. A liar knows the truth and tries to hide it. But a bullshitter doesn't care whether something is true or false at all. This is just to sound convincing, to achieve some effect to the audience. It is speech produced without a concern for whether it's true or false. And that makes it more dangerous than a liar. And that's also what we see around us. And I really like to tag along what you just said, that through time and human evolution, we understand who to trust, whether they are lying or bullshitting in different languages. And this bullshit indicator gives a sense of how far can you trust an AI, so you can treat it.
This is a benchmark comparing AI models on two things. The top chart shows accuracy, basically how much the AI actually knows.
But I've turned it off now.
The last thing that I wanted to say is that if you work in a company and you have a very important strategic question and you ask it to an intern, you might validate their answer, but you always kind of consider, well, I just talked to an intern. Maybe that person doesn't know exactly what's going on with the strategy here. So that type of sensing whether you think something is right or not, is accurate or not, has a good explanation. That is where this bullshit benchmark is very important. That is what I wanted to add.
100%.
Let's move to the whole Warner Bros. And Netflix deal of Warner Bros. Has been acquired by Paramount. It was a big deal that Netflix was going after as well. And right after that, they announced a smaller deal where they bought a company called Interpositive, which is a company from Ben Affleck. And then some things clicked for me. This might be a very intelligent move. And I've been talking about this pod quite some time, that teams are getting smaller. You have to be prepared for using AI. And rather than spending 100+ million, I know how big this deal was. It was a very big deal into more a traditional acquisition, or do you move to a more agile approach, ready for the new world, which they seem to be going for? Pretty interesting. What do you take away from that?
Yeah, I haven't really been following this closely, I have to admit. I was following it right up to the point where I thought Netflix was going to acquire Warner Brothers. And I thought that was good because it would mean a consolidation of a lot of streaming content and intellectual property. But yeah, you're right. So Netflix backed out, and Paramount Skydance eventually won the deal at 110 billion. 2 billion was actually the offer that Netflix had first put forward. And so that's quite a significant uptake. Yeah, 110 billion. It's a massive deal. And I think that your analysis is a very interesting one. And Ben Affleck has, of course, been one of the handful of actors that have been going out and giving at least a somewhat educated analysis, insights, statements on the future of Hollywood movies, visual content, and AI. I haven't always agreed with him on everything, but I do think that he's one of the more level-headed people out there as an actor that is at least making a serious effort to understand where things is going.
Exactly.
So I think you might be totally right on your analysis.
Yeah, that's one point. And the other point, you dropped the word IP. Is that IP from Harry Potter and those franchises worth that much money in the world of AI, where everybody can create anything, especially in terms of video and just replicating these characters in a different way? Maybe that is biting off a little bit more than they can chew.
Well, this ties back to our previous conversations on copyright and patenting, right? Because
Yeah.
I think what's going to happen, and this also ties back to the start of our conversation on agentic AI and how people use it. China's strategy in AI is open source, provide open source models. And these open source models are basically doing the same to the AI world as Linux did to the software world. It's very likely that what we'll see is that all of these open source models, which mainly come out of China, will start to become the foundation of the new AI infrastructure versus the closed source just being some kind of consumer product for some people. That means that the same thing is going to happen for AI video making, all of that. That means that we'll see two things happening. We'll see a massive deluge, a tsunami of fan-generated content through AI models that are not guardrailed against that, which are the Chinese models as open source. And companies and countries will initially try to kind of push back on this. But what you'll see is exactly, again, a scene from the book Accelerando, in which the companies, there's this fight, this legal war, but the companies that are basically breaking the law by using these AI models, they are created and disappeared so fast that they're gone before legal action can actually be taken. Because that's the world of agentic AI. And so this is going to happen. So that will mean that there will be a massive wave of content that is technically infringing on all kinds of copyright, but it will just pour across the world to the point where it will completely destroy any and all attempts at kind of stopping that. And then that would mean that the value of these IPs will basically collapse. So yes.
So I think this is really a smart thing that Netflix is doing, and more future ready. What I also discovered, and it's interesting to mention here, like Affleck's thinking, I understand from researching this topic that he was also behind something called artist equity. And he basically pushed for a creator-aligned compensation model for the movie The Rip that was just recently released on Netflix. Not such a good movie, to my opinion, but that is not relevant for the conversation. He was making a plea for bonus participation for the entire crew. From the people equally getting some kind of bonus if they hit some kind of target, which was the first time that Netflix agreed to do something like that. That is also thinking about a payment structure for creators that is more suitable for creating things with a small team with AI. So again, new ways of thinking that are probably more future-proof than doing a big takeover like Paramount did.
Yeah. And I think this is big because I don't know if you know, but Taylor Swift on her last world tour, she made billions, I think, or she made a billion,
probably.
or at least she made a lot of money. But what she did, which really was massive online for those following it, is that when she finished her tour, she cut everybody that worked for her everybody that worked for her through the entire world tour, she cut them in on the profits. And so some people that worked with her that had a normal job and they already got their normal salaries and everything, they got a bonus check of like 100K, right? Life-changing amounts of money for these people. And I think that was really cool. I'm not a massive Taylor Swift fan, but I think that was something that's really cool. And this is, again, now Ben Affleck is doing something along those same lines. And this is good because these are signals that that we're moving into a world where these kind of mindsets of more fairly sharing benefits and profits that can be enabled through AI are already taking root. And this makes me optimistic that we can pivot away from more dystopic outcomes to more positive outcomes in this kind of future AI-driven productivity economy.
Exactly. I like that. Hey, I would like to do one final knockout topic, because this is something that is just mind-blowing in a way. There's a company called Eon Systems, and they have published Fruitfly Connectome, which is basically all the brain receptors configuration that have been mapped already in 2024. But what they did, they uploaded it to a simulation tool where you can actually see a 3D simulation of the actual fly. And that fly is behaving like a normal fly is doing, as you can see here on the screen. So what is basically happening here, we have a brain upload, the neurons and the patterns into a simulation. And well, yeah, I would have never guessed that we would have have done this actually, right? This is just a matrix in action. A fly has, this has 139,000 neurons and 50 million synaptics. Their next objective is to do it with a mouse that have 70 million. And of course, they're aiming to do this ultimately with a human. Mind-boggling stuff.
And yet, this ties in perfectly in so many ways, right? We've been mentioning Accelerando, which is also a science fiction book I'm reading, and it's always mentioned on the Moonshot podcast by Peter Diamandis. And literally the first chapters of Accelerando, they talk about how lobster brains are being scanned and uploaded to cyberspace, and they basically turn into an artificial intelligence sentience. And this is part of the whole plot. It's very, very cool. And this is why OpenClaw is called OpenClaw, and it used to be Claudebot. It's a reference to the lobsters. At the same time, Ray Kurzweil, the great prophet of the Singularity, he literally predicted this. He said that in the 2020s, we would start to reverse engineer the human brain through simulation, through reproducing and simulating the brain. And that would both help us to understand artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence in turn would help us to understand the human consciousness and the brain. And so all of these things that have been predicted and that were in science fiction books are now literally happening. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It starts with a fly. Next are going to be mice and lobsters, and then ultimately, this will be humans. And I fully expect that by 2035 we'll have maybe the first candidate of Neuralink who has his brain uploaded or copied or cloned digitally. And by 2040, 2045, I think this will be mainstream practice, where people will either have literal digital clones of their own brain or maybe have their own consciousness uploaded into the cloud. I don't know, we'll have to see by then. But yeah, this is real. And if anybody wants to know where that leads, watch the series Pantheon on Netflix.
So, maybe one question to wrap it off. Do you think that the fly understands and knows that he's in a simulation?
Well, you know where I stand on this. Somebody asked me last Thursday at Hogan Lovells after my keynote, they said, do you believe in God? Interesting question, right? But that is the kind of stuff that we're pushed towards. And I said, well, I believe in the simulation. I believe that we are in a simulation, which is running inside of another simulation, which is running inside of another simulation, which is running inside of another simulation. And we're probably like 123 billion layers down in the simulation. I think that is a very, very, very likely scenario. So yeah, I think that the fly in there probably doesn't know that he's a fly. Or that he's a digital fly.
It was a pleasure again. Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to keep track of all these shifts, follow our newsletter, Innovation Network, all one word, .substack.com. You can subscribe there and surf the singularity together with us. One final request. If you like this, do like it on all the social media platforms. Share it, comment, talk about it. Like they say in the Netherlands.
See you later.
Oh,
It's rap.